These tend to be two of the underlying assumptions when we move into a college level writing class. We live in a society that has bifurcated our skill sets, and perhaps that's changed now, but growing up, I was told that either you're good at math and science or you're good at art and English and literature. And obviously, that's a load of crap. However, that's a really destructive division. When those of us who engage in those fields know that um, sciences and mathematics requires an insane amount of creativity, and those who work in artistic fields understand that there's a structure and there's a science and there's a logic to the way that we construct things like art pieces of art or theories or pieces of writing. And so it's definitely leaked into our consciousness. And so I hear these a lot of, oh, I'm not going into a career where I need to write that much, or I just need to learn how to write enough to get through college. And true, there's a lot like the kind of formulaic writing that we do in school, in high school. Yeah, very few of you are going to be writing essays when you leave college. But it's the skills that are embedded in those essays that are really crucial. And so I want to talk briefly today about changing our mindset and embracing a little bit more of the culture that's required and the change in culture that's required for us to use our skills to succeed. It doesn't take a whole lot of Googling to recognize that these myths about jobs are just that. They're myths. The reality of the workplace now is that we're not just sitting in an office and verbally communicating with people. We conduct a lot of our work over the internet and over email. A study from about 2.5 years ago, I guess it's 3 years ago, showed that people spend a third of their job time on email. And I am eager to see how that changes now that many people are working from home. A lot of companies, tech companies primarily, have chosen to just allow people to continue working at home. That's going to completely change the way that people communicate in their job, and it's going to make that writing a lot more crucial. And yeah, emails are writing. And same goes to just the prevalence of social media as a major part of our businesses. There's people who have jobs to literally, that's their job, of just writing copy for social media, writing copy for websites, writing marketing materials. All of that is writing. It may not have a thesis, but it certainly has a purpose, and you have to construct enough to achieve that purpose. The detriments of writing, of poor writing, are tremendous. It costs companies an amazing amount of money, and perhaps later in the I was going to say semester. I'm going to keep calling it semester, summer semester. I'll bring in a couple like worst case scenarios of companies that have just completely lost it because of really silly, stupid mistakes that have to do with writing. Because part of writing is proofing, is checking your sources, is making sure that you've backed something up enough, making sure that it makes sense for the person who's reading it. And as of last year, $37 billion from major companies is because of poor communication, decisions made based off of instructions or email or reports that didn't properly summarize some research. Those of you going into business related fields or tech related fields, you have to synthesize a lot of different reports from things or numbers and then put it into a nugget that makes sense. There's a lot of responsibility there, because if you get something wrong, if something isn't super clear, your team could then make large financial decisions off of that could cost your company quite a bit. And so, because it's what I do, I did some research, because I'm just tired of hearing students say, like, well, no, I want to own a gym. Oh my gosh, if you're going to be a small business owner, get used to writing like all the time. Oh, well, I'm just going into medicine. My best friend's a doctor, and I'm going to bring her up a lot as a case study because she has to write things all the time, and she's constantly texting me asking if something makes sense or how she should go about articulating something, because she also has to write for lots of different levels. The way that she communicates something to her team versus to a medical journal versus to a patient versus to a nurse is going to be totally different, even if she's communicating the same piece of information. So this was from a 2018 study, so 2 years ago, but still. In a survey of Fortune 500 companies, 82% listed good writing as near the top of the list of hiring priorities. Engineering and IT, it's the second most requested baseline skill. I believe that's under just general knowledge of working systems. So it's major, major, major up there. Healthcare and finance, one of the top 4 requested skills. And when I say writing, there's a lot that I mean by that. Part of writing is audience awareness, like I mentioned with my doctor friend, understanding who you're talking to and adjusting that language, making sure that as you're writing, even if it's just a quick email to a client, that you maintain authority. It's really easy to have people lose faith in you just because of the word choice that you've used, or perhaps not polishing something as well as it could have been. I mentioned reporting, the importance of making sure that the information you're disseminating is accurate, synthesizing lots of different pieces of data and observations, making sure that you articulate data for people to understand. Not very many people can look at a bunch of numbers and get what that means. A lot of what we do as writers is translate information for other people, and it's just same act as translating into a different language, and that's writing. Being able to adapt our writing, our email, our presentation into different forms of communication, turning a report into a PowerPoint, turning a PowerPoint into a brochure, turning that into a speech. All of these different things require that adaptation. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about persuasion, about rhetorical appeals, rhetorical fallacies, rhetorical strategies, ways that we can be more persuasive when we are speaking, choosing more quality information and language over just quantity. That's a really major one that comes up. People don't just want paragraphs and paragraphs of information. Think about who holds a lot of authority in businesses or in professions. If you listen to them speak, or if you see what they write, it's pretty condensed. They don't spend a whole lot of time using, really, really big language. They're short and to the point. Being able to brainstorm, identify problems, and just being observational. All of that has to do with writing. So just a couple more stats to throw at you. 73% want a candidate, according to the National Association of College Employers. I believe this is also 2018. Want a candidate with strong written communication skills. Communication and writing are they're holding hands all the time. Written communications, number 3 most desired quality overall, behind leadership skills and ability to work as a team member. 93% of employers want an employee to think critically. We'll talk about that in a second. Communicate clearly and solve complex problems. And then 75% want stronger focus on written communication skills at a college level. And that's a big deal, and something that those of us working in higher ed are trying to fight for, because in a traditional college format, you take a writing composition course, maybe 2 of them. It's usually 2, having 1 be a research course. And then you're just kind of done. And then you hit your senior year, and a lot of people end up getting lower grades their senior year because their writing skills have obviously inevitably declined because they're not keeping them up. A lot of departments will then get in touch with us and say, why are our students not writing well? I thought this was you guys were supposed to do this. But freshman classes, 4 years is a lot of time. Think about being a freshman in high school to a senior in high school. So much happens there. And I can't remember if I was a senior, a single freshman class that I took or what I learned in it. It's very easy for that stuff to dilute over time. And really what we should have is a composition class freshman year, and then one our junior year, or in your guys' case, the semester maybe before you graduate, so that we get a little primer, or even better, writing classes that are specifically about disciplines. And many schools, some of the ones I teach at specifically, are doing that. There was an article in Harvard Business Review. I love Harvard Business Review. Again, I teach in a business department, so I may occasionally bring in things like this from this one CEO of a company. I forget which company he manages. I completely forgot. Kyle Vines, and he wrote this article several years ago saying, I won't hire people who use poor grammar. And of course, I already mentioned this isn't a grammar class, but it's an important thing for us to think about when we consider turning in a complete piece of work. So we wrote this, and it just shook up the very small world of of academia. But his reasons are that when somebody uses poor grammar, it shows that there's not an attention to detail. And so if somebody gets, for example, a resume and it's riddled with spelling errors, it says something about you. Should it? Should it show you, say that you are lazy, that you don't care? No, I think you probably do care. However, whatever we create says something about us, whether that's fair or not. Having good grammar shows that you know how to think critically, that you understand sort of how things are communicated, and that you can analyze, explain complex problems. And it can also show that you are intelligent. So I mentioned, I think in my, no, I didn't mention it yet. Yes, I did. I mentioned in the extended policy lecture, which you can find above, that there is a major difference between those writing in English as a second language and those writing in a first. And so your employer can also understand that, and it's not going to say like, oh, they didn't use the right its, if it's clear that you're a second language learner. But if it's clear that you're a first language learner and you still make that simple mistake, that says volumes about, even though it's not completely fair, about perhaps how much you've absorbed in school. And it may be the defining reason why they don't hire you. And that question at the end, an employer might wonder, what else have you failed to learn that might be useful? It reminds me of something that I heard on the radio like 3 years ago. I don't know if any of you are classic rock fans. I'm only fairly. But these are all dudes. And they're the band Van Halen. Perhaps you've heard of them, perhaps not. So they, in like the late 70s, early 80s, were just considered like mega divas. We hear about like the divas who expect there to be like 14 avions and, I don't know, 4 bananas and these various things that have to be in their dressing room or else they throw a fit. A lot of that originated with Van Halen because they would ask when they went into a green room, they would send in advance somebody to say, hey, we need a bowl of M&Ms, but all of the red ones must be taken out, which seems incredibly arbitrary. And it became kind of just like a joke of like, oh my gosh, they're so full of themselves that they're just doing this thing that will, that just causes more grief for the people at the venue. And then whenever they arrived at a venue and they didn't have the bowl of M&Ms that was full of every M&M but red ones, if they noticed a single red one in the bowl, they would refuse to do the show. And so it only came out recently that in an interview that the reason they didn't do that is because it was kind of the sign to them that if they didn't follow that instruction, what other instructions did they not follow? Because they have hundreds of thousands worth of equipment, of musical equipment. And if somebody is slacking and not pulling out all the red M&Ms, it shows that what if my equipment was damaged? What if there's something that's not safe? They're clearly not looking into the requirements to do a show here. So super dramatic, not a perfect example, but that's a little bit of what grammar, poor structure, sloppy writing can signal to your employer. Some of the jobs that we traditionally don't think of needing writing obviously do. A lot of the literature that's been out in the last 20 years has pointed to that fact. So USC is a really big champion of writing within healthcare professionals. There's even different writers retreats that that USC does to teach health professionals how to write better. There's lots and lots of scholarly journals all about the value of writing skills that a lot of med schools have implemented so far. Business, major writing skill. Those of you who are going into or transferring to a business program, you're gonna have to write papers that are in the 70, 80, 90 length that are marketing reports and synthesizing a lot of different stuff. Oh, it missed out on I had an engineering one. Where did it go? Sometimes I forget to click my little thing. There it is. Engineering as well. That's one that we just really think about like numbers and systems. But even then, if you create something, if you construct an a certain like plan, you have to communicate that to your team. And in many cases, you have to communicate that to your customers. You have to show step by step how something works. And so there's this major act of translation that goes into the documentation of your work as an engineer. Which is why a lot of people have been publishing articles like this. Why to hire an English major instead of an MBA, for example. And tech companies in particular have been reaching out beyond just, people who are computer engineers. And the reasons for that are, I mean, they make sense. They want people who are committed to creative thinking. A big thing is making sure that the product, that the copy sounds human, that there's not a lot of error, especially error that comes out after they've spent a lot of money on stuff, and that you can't really necessarily get back. A big one is about just this diversity, that there's versatility and that you don't get stuck in an idea vacuum of just all these people who went through the same programs, who understand the same kind of stuff. It's easy to just get stuck in this vortex of logic if you don't have somebody who's able to break past that and think critically. Thank goodness you don't have to be an English major to do this at all. And that also doesn't mean that every English major is good at this. Mastering writing skills, I love the language of this, can help future-proof your career. So especially there's the looming fear of automation coming up, that 60% of jobs are going to be automated. But there's so much that automation cannot do. They cannot write. They cannot persuade. There's no empathy, critical thinking. I'm just reading down here. Imagination, vision. And so making sure that your writing can do that ensures that you have job security. And that leads to another thing I'm tired of hearing, which is, well, I'm just a bad writer. And a lot of that comes out of our really sometimes shitty situations for English classes and language arts classes. There's a reason that people have really kind of all or nothing attitudes towards their English classes. I find students either like really enjoyed them or they really didn't like them. And that's because the product that we're creating is much different than if we're in a bio class or a history class. There isn't anything really subjective. And so that's frustrating for people of like, I can't get it right. How do you get it right? And it also is really personal, even if it's something like, oh, summarize To Kill a Mockingbird. Even if you really didn't put a lot of heart and soul into that, it's still like your idea and your words that you're giving to somebody else. And if you get a grade back on that, like a C minus, it doesn't take a lot of psychological jumping jacks to tell you like, oh, my ideas are a C minus. And so it's so easy for us to take it personally, completely unconsciously. Whereas if it's like a bio test, I think the only sadness you can really feel or being offended is like, oh, I studied so hard and I still got a poor grade. But it's more just like, oh, I got that thing wrong. I forgot it, instead of, oh, I put something out there I believed and that thing was rejected. In the same way, those who had a really good experience, it's a space where you can start to be validated by a lot of your ideas. And unfortunately, there's just a lot of bad English teachers out there, as there are in any subject. But what people don't really get is that there's really no such thing as a bad writer, just a writer who hasn't practiced writing, because writing is a skill that you can master just like anything else, or maybe not master, acquire. I haven't mastered writing at all. It's a continuous practice that we have to continue doing, and will never be perfect, which is why even the most illustrious published writers hate reading their own work, and they hate it after they create it. If we have a couple artists in our class, so a common stereotype is the artist who just wants to destroy their work after they make it. And it's that same thing of like, oh, I've learned from doing this and I know that I can do this thing better. But this is good news for you, because we can go through certain skills that will enhance your writing that doesn't have to do with, having flowery poetic language. If you do write very poetically and have a great vocabulary, good, that's going to help a lot. But that doesn't equal good writing. Something that I learned when I was going through school. I loved creative writing. I naturally enjoyed it. And by natural, I mean I had a mother who encouraged it. I think that would have been different if I didn't have somebody who did, or if I didn't read a lot growing up. However, even as an English major, I got some bad grades because I relied on my flowery language, and I forgot what the prompt was asking, or it wasn't clear for any reader other than myself, and it didn't matter if I had all these allusions and allegories and alliteration if it literally didn't make sense. And so that's the real key of writing is we must be writing for somebody outside of ourselves. It doesn't matter if we came up with an incredible equation, or if we came up with an incredible experiment, or if we have this amazing idea, if we can't articulate it, it's nothing. Like, it literally doesn't exist. And so our real skill that we can learn is just how to articulate this stuff so other people can understand it. And so where we're going to start in our class is just by critical thinking, which is a term that came up in a couple of those statistics and articles. And so critical thinking is really the shift between high school and college, where you're not just memorizing things or saying, here's what happened. Like, let me memorize these dates. I know what this equation is. I know what this formula is. I know what happened in this text, but then starting to ask, well, why did this thing happen? Why is this equation constructed this way? How does this compare with something else? How does this work? And that's I call it just like, those are the money questions. Those are the things that make you valuable as an employee somewhere, is that you're able to provide something different. Anybody can summarize something. Not anybody can start asking questions about it and try to understand the significance of something. So when we say critical thinking, it means a couple things. Using creativity to solve problems or achieve goals, not just doing what's obvious. A big one is asking questions, many that don't have answers or will be really difficult to answer. Imagining and valuing other points of view and perspectives, not just thinking of what you know, but listening to others and starting to just sort of compare it to what you already know. And this is going to be really key as we enter into a class on implicit bias, where there's going to be some stuff that's uncomfortable because it could push against something that you already think. But it doesn't mean that what you think is wrong. It just means that there's these two things that are now next to each other. And we can look at both and say, okay, let me try to understand both of these things. How do they exist together? Can they exist together? What might be more accurate about which one of these? And so just because there's an idea that we discuss, or something that's perhaps frustrating, I don't want to say there is no right or wrong, but we are going to learn to not use that language, because it insinuates that there's some sort of morally objective system we're functioning under, which there just isn't. Things that are good to some people are bad to others. Things that are bad to some people are good to others. And so when we talk about right or wrong, we have to narrow in on what we mean by right. We could look at something like legality. We could say legally this thing is wrong. Okay, that makes sense. We can see what the authority is there, which is a certain countries or states' laws or whatever. But that may not work for everybody. And a lot of it is being curious, looking for why something exists as it is instead of just accepting facts. That's a really big one right now, trying to figure out, like, okay, why is all this civil unrest happening? Is it just because people are angry? Well, why are they angry? A really interesting conversations happening around looting. People saying, well, I get being angry and rioting, but why do they have to loot? Well, actually, there's a really complex history behind looting and psychologically what the purpose of that is. And it just takes a little bit of digging, and thank God for Google and Wikipedia that helps me find those things of like, oh, this thing that I thought was just this impulsive human reaction is actually a really complex historical system that has been successful in the past. And I know that that's a controversial statement, but we're going to be doing a lot of historical research trying to understand, okay, why does this thing exist? Why do we act that way? And that could be historical or just contextual. Why does my brain make that association? Well, let's look at the neuroscience. And it's important to state that nobody is a natural critical thinker. This is a skill that requires discipline and honing, just like playing an instrument or learning a sport. Nobody can do it really naturally. And so a lot of our reading is going to help us practice that critical thinking. And so on Monday, I'm going to talk about our reflective double entry journals, which are going to be kind of like our weekly exercise to start flexing our critical thinking muscle, start using these why and how questions so that it eventually becomes completely second nature, and it's really fun. So some questions that I want you guys to think about in this writing lab, and just between now and next week, what role does writing play in your field? And not just like writing papers, even if that's, oh, I need to communicate with my clients, over the phone, and I have to document that, or emails that you have to send, or just any time that you have to write anything down. Like, what does that look like if you're going into a field of, I think we have trying to think of anybody as a art major completely, but writing artist statements, writing grant letters. There's so many hidden types of writing that are involved in different fields. So maybe do a little bit of Googling, see what kind of stuff you're expected to do, because now is the time to start figuring out what those skills are that will help you achieve really successful writing in those different mediums. And the other question I want you to consider, so going back to that statement of like, I'm a bad writer. What have your experiences been in writing classes? We've all taken a writing or English class or a language arts or literature class. So I just wanted you guys to take inventory for me. And this is really helpful for me to see what has been helpful for you in the past and what has been really challenging and frustrating. I adapt my classes based off of what has worked and not worked for my students. So it might be that something I have on the syllabus, I realize like, yeah, I don't think that thing is really going to fit this class. Maybe next semester it will, but maybe not for you guys, or vice versa. So on this writing lab discussion board, chat about it with each other. And I think it's also really nice to see that other people have maybe struggled with the same thing, or understand that, oh, this thing that was helpful for me actually wasn't helpful for that person. So be specific, cite specific examples. It could be about assignments. It could be about just class environments. It could be about communication. It could be about the content of the classes, stuff that you've read that was like really helpful, stuff you read that you just hated. All of that is really valuable for me and a good place for us to launch off on Monday when we sort of start fresh.